Hey everyone, back with another video, and today's question is a question I recently got from someone that messaged me on Instagram and basically asked just what do I think about CrossFit for rugby players. And so I'm just going to give a small breakdown of what I think about CrossFit and does it lend itself to the sport, and does the training for CrossFit lend itself to rugby. So before I start, I'd like to preface this video with a few things. And the first one is I do know a bit about CrossFit. I did work in a CrossFit gym for a while, so I do know a bit about it. I also was involved with a club that also used CrossFit, or a CrossFit box, that supported the club and helped the players from the club, work out at that gym and do CrossFit workouts at that gym. When I'm speaking about this, I'm really not taking a hit at CrossFit, but more just the modality, comparing it to rugby and rugby training. Firstly, it's important to understand that there's a lot of sports out there that can lend itself to rugby training. But it's important to note that these sports cannot be the full training for rugby. And why is that? Well, the simple answer is because it's a sport on its own. And that is something that people do not understand when they ask this question, is that that is a sport on their own. I believe that wrestling is one of the most beneficial things you can do for rugby. What I do not think is that rugby players should only wrestle to prepare themselves for rugby. Because why is that? Because rugby is a sport on its own that has skills and necessities that you need to know and you need to be good at, that wrestling just does not contain. That does, however, maybe mean that maybe you can incorporate some of the wrestling stuff. And this is where my belief system comes in, that I believe there are some stuff that wrestling training does that needs to be incorporated into rugby training. But that does not mean I think that all rugby players should train like wrestlers. And that is the problem with CrossFit essentially as well with rugby. There's a lot of aspects in CrossFit that I believe is beneficial for rugby players. So I'm just going to name a few. For me is really lifting heavy, building a lot of capacity in various qualities, which I really like, and doing like things like Olympic lifts and just generally getting better at the skill of lifting, which I also think is a really good thing for rugby players and any athlete in general. But there are obviously a few things that come short to it, and the number one thing being that it is not rugby. So you cannot train for a sport by doing other sport. There's no CrossFit athlete in this world that will tell you, well, I'm going on Tuesdays and on Wednesdays to a rugby practice to train for my CrossFit Open. No CrossFit athlete will tell you that, because they're focusing on CrossFit. They will, however, maybe lend from different sports, because there are gymnastic aspects in CrossFit. CrossFit athletes might lend some modalities from gymnastics training, but they won't only go train gymnastics. Naturally, I also believe that a lot of rugby players, because of the competitive nature of CrossFit, like CrossFit, and that is why they are attracted to it. So I do see why people really like it, and I do see that it is more fun than your most typical traditional S&C sometimes, and it is more fun than doing nothing or just going for a jog. There are inherent deficits in a lot of training stuff from the traditional strength and conditioning world that could make rugby training more fun, especially the strength and conditioning aspect of it, and make it more intent driven. However, there are shortcomings in the CrossFit world if you're going to try and make that your bulk of training. So I'm just going to answer this question as if this is your bulk of strength and conditioning work that you are doing in a week as a rugby player through the year. The shortcomings being that CrossFit is extremely taxing. The sessions are really hard and accompanied with a lot of volume, and a lot of sessions always tend to be the same as the previous. So intensities don't really fall a lot. There's this funny saying that, like, yeah, you'll do like 100 reps of something on CrossFit and the next day you'll have squats again. So it's kind of like it's just an ongoing thing the whole time. And it's not, the volume isn't really super regulated for someone that wants to be able to play rugby and perform. You will struggle to do practices fully, which are the more important part. So it's not your strength and conditioning program. Your most important part is being able to go full out at practices and be better at the sport. And if your strength and conditioning is absolutely destroying you because CrossFit is your thing and you're doing a lot of CrossFit sessions, then it's not beneficial. Number two is that CrossFit lacks a lot of rest times that you need for building more high threshold physical quality. So, for example, let's talk about speed, let's talk about sprinting. There's a lack of sprinting in CrossFit training. Most of your runs you're going to do are going to be sub maximal because you're tired, and that's the whole point of CrossFit. And unfortunately, that is a big component of CrossFit. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing for CrossFit. It just means it's not beneficial for rugby players because rugby players need to sprint and they need to get faster. So there's a lack of the sprinting and speed aspect in building those really max intent with intent qualities and the rest that is needed to train those qualities. My third thing would be the lack of a plyometric program. The most type of things close to it maybe in CrossFit will be like jump rope and double unders. That is like your only thing, but you need various types of plyometrics to benefit really from them. And it cannot just be jumping up and down stationary. It's not beneficial, but it cannot be the only thing. And unfortunately, that is it. Yes, I know there are box jumps, but a box jump is not a plyometric. Just saying. And again, like I said, these things need to be done, not fully fatigued. And most of the stuff you do in CrossFit are fatigued. You are doing everything in a fatigued state. Lastly, I will talk about more of there's a lack of a specific goal when it comes to building specific musculature or building specific tissue and building a capacity. So I'm going to talk about the neck, for example. Obviously, there's no neck training in CrossFit because that doesn't make any sense. There has to be neck training in rugby. There's different focuses that we put on as well in rugby that we really need, especially if you're someone that is, for example, playing prop or anything like that. You do need other specific stuff. You can't just do CrossFit stuff. And at the end of the day, this video is not to say that CrossFit is a terrible sport. I do love CrossFit. I've dabbled in it before. I do some sessions with CrossFit aspects into it. And obviously, CrossFit is also just regular strength training. It's a bunch of training that is mixed into each other. So obviously, it's one of the types of training that will probably not destroy your rugby career if you do it. But I'm just saying that if you're going to do it as the bulk of your training for rugby, you are missing out on a lot of potential gains that you can be doing. I'm making this video especially because I know how many rugby clubs use it, traditional way of training their guys, and it makes sense because you can get a lot of guys in one session. CrossFit trainings are technically usually very time efficient and it gets everyone moving at one stage and it gets guys fit, which I do agree with. I do like it. And if that is your only means of getting a session in, getting weights in, then by all means do CrossFit then. But I'm just saying that if you're someone who is looking to improve your qualities for your specific sport, don't look to train another sport completely and immerse yourself fully in that sport. That is, rugby is a specific sport on its own, and it also has its own specific branch of strength and conditioning. I do believe that strength and conditioning is also very general, however, but as soon as you do a sport which is really, really specific and you fully immerse yourself, you do kind of turn a blind eye to a lot of things that you will need in your specific training for the sport which you do. Hope you enjoyed this video.